The ranch sat at the edge of the Cariboo, like it had always been there, like the land had grown up around it instead of the other way around. 3 fence lines running east toward the tree line, a barn that leaned slightly south from 40 years of wind, and a main house with a porch that caught the afternoon light in a way that made everything look warmer than it was. Maren Kessler had not planned to stop there. She had planned to reach Williams Lake by Thursday, find work at the diner her cousin had mentioned, and figure out the rest from there. That was the plan as of Monday. By Wednesday afternoon, her truck had other ideas. The engine made a sound like a man clearing his throat before bad news, and then it simply stopped right there on the gravel road outside the property, with the leaning barn and the long fence line, and nobody visible anywhere. She was 26 years old and had $43 and a bag of clothes in the back seat and a toolbox that had belonged to her father, which she mostly used as a footrest. She sat behind the wheel for a moment, looking at the steam coming from under the hood, and thought, well, then she got out, because there was nothing else to do. The man who came out of the barn did not hurry. He walked the way people walk when they have owned ground for a long time and nothing on it surprises them anymore. He was somewhere in his mid-40s, with gray at his temples and a face that looked like it had been made for weather, wide and steady and not particularly given to expression. He stopped about 10 feet from her truck and looked at it the way a doctor looks at something he already knows the diagnosis for. His name, she would learn, was Rupert Hale. He did not introduce himself right away. He looked at the truck, he looked at her. He looked back at the truck. Radiator, he said. I know, she said, though she hadn't been certain. He was quiet for a moment. A horse somewhere in the barn shifted its weight and bumped against a stall door. Parts'll have to come from Quesnel, he said. 2-3 days, maybe. Maren looked down the road in both directions. There was nothing in either direction except distance. I can pay for the parts, she said. When I get work. He didn't ask what she meant by that, or where she was going, or why she was on this road in the first place. He just looked at the truck again and nodded once, the way a man nods when he has decided something and doesn't need to announce it. There's a room in the house, he said. If you need a place to wait. She almost said no. She had been saying no to things like this for 2 years, the kind of offers that felt like charity even when they weren't meant that way, the kind that required something of you even if neither person said so out loud. But she was $43 from nothing, and the nearest town was 60 kilometers away, and the afternoon was already going gold and cold at the edges. I pull my own weight, she said. All right, he said, and that was all. The room was at the back of the house, small and clean, with a window that looked out over the north pasture. There was a quilt on the bed that was old enough to have been made by someone's grandmother, and a hook on the door for hanging things, and that was about it. Maren had lived in worse. She had lived in a truck for 6 weeks the previous winter, which gave her a useful baseline for comparison. Rupert Hale had a daughter. Her name was Gretchen, 9 years old, serious-faced, with her father's way of watching things before she decided what to do with them. She appeared in the kitchen doorway the first morning while Maren was making coffee and studied her with the frank, unself-conscious assessment that only children and animals are still capable of. Do you know how to braid hair? Gretchen asked. Not a question exactly. More of an inquiry into competence. I do, Maren said. My dad doesn't, Gretchen said and went back to her room. There was no mother. Maren did not ask about this and Rupert did not offer it. There are things you understand without being told, and this was one of them. Something that had happened some time ago and had settled into the way the house ran, the way Rupert made Gretchen's lunch in silence each morning, the way he checked the braid she'd done herself in the mirror by the door before school, without commenting on it either way. He was doing the best he could. Anyone could see that. The house was fed and warm, and the child was loved, but there were edges that a man alone couldn't always reach. Maren made herself useful because it was not in her nature to sit still, and because she had said she would pull her own weight, and she did not say things she didn't mean. She split firewood in the mornings before Rupert was up. She helped Gretchen with the braid. She started making dinner without asking, because the fridge had things in it that would keep longer cooked than raw, and because she was there anyway, and because the kitchen had good light. Rupert came in the first evening and stopped in the doorway to the kitchen in a way that she noticed, just a fraction of a second too long, before he continued to the sink to wash his hands. You didn't have to do that, he said. I know, she said. He sat down at the table. Gretchen sat across from him. Maren put the food down and started to move away toward the back room, and Rupert said, without looking up, There's 3 plates. She sat down. The parts would take 4 days, not 3, then 6. The man in Quesnel had to order one of them from Prince George, and the weather turned and the road got slow. Maren stayed because she was waiting, and because there was nowhere better to go, and because, by the end of the first week, Leaving felt like more of a choice than staying. She learned the rhythms of the place. Rupert was up before the light, checking the horses, checking the fences on the south quarter, that something kept getting through. He came in around 7, ate in about 5 minutes, went back out. He came in for dinner at 6:30, no earlier, no later. He didn't talk much, but he wasn't cold. He was more like a man who had learned to be careful with words because he'd spent too long without anyone to say them to. Gretchen talked enough for both of them. She talked about her teacher, and about the horse she'd decided was hers, even though technically it belonged to her dad, and about the book she was reading, and about the fact that there were 18 distinct cloud formations recognized by the World Meteorological Organization, and she had personally observed 9 of them. "Do you think I'll see all 18 before I die?" she asked one evening. "I think that's very possible," Marin said. "Dad thinks I might be a meteorologist. What do you think?" Gretchen considered. "I think I might be several things," she said. Rupert was listening to this from behind his coffee mug. Marin caught him almost smiling, and then she looked away before he noticed she'd seen it. The cold came in properly at the end of the second week. Not the cold that feels like autumn running late, but the real one. The kind that settles into the ground and the bones and means it. The kind you feel in the barn, even with the animals in it. One of the horses, the old gray one that Gretchen called Pepper, and who technically didn't have a name in Rupert's records, had been off her feed for 2 days. Marin found this out because she'd started going to the barn in the evenings, after Gretchen was in bed, not for any particular reason, just because it was a good place to think. The barn had the particular quality of silence that large animals give a space. Present, warm, occupied in a way that makes human silence feel less empty by comparison. She was sitting on a hay bale watching Pepper when Rupert came in. He didn't seem surprised to find her there. He went straight to the horse, ran a hand down her neck, checked her water, looked at the feed she hadn't touched. "She does this sometimes," he said. "In November seasonal," Marin said. "Something like that." He sat down on the other end of the hay bale, not close. Just on the same bale, in the same barn, in the same cold. The horse breathed in the dark. Outside, the wind moved along the eaves. "Where were you going?" he said. "Before the truck, Williams Lake. My cousin said there was work. Is there? There's a diner. I don't know. Maybe." He was quiet for a while. "You've been moving around a lot." It wasn't a question, and it wasn't judgment either. Just the kind of observation that comes from watching a person for 2 weeks. "Since my dad died," she said. She hadn't meant to say it that way. The whole of it, flat like that. But it came out before she could arrange it better, and once it was out, it sat there between them, true and too large to take back. Rupert didn't say he was sorry. She had heard sorry enough that it had worn smooth, like a stone handled too many times. He just nodded, once, the way he had nodded when she'd said she'd pull her own weight, like he had heard the real thing underneath the words. "My wife died 3 years ago," he said. She didn't say sorry either. It felt right not to. They sat with the horse in the cold for a long time after that. And somehow that was the most honest conversation she'd had with anyone in 2 years. It was Gretchen who broke things open, the way children do, without meaning to and without knowing what they've done. It was a Saturday, and it had snowed in the night. Not much, just the kind that coats everything and makes the world go quiet and bright. Gretchen wanted to go out in it, and Rupert was on the phone with someone in the south pasture about a fence issue, and so Marin took her out, and they walked the field behind the barn in the new snow, and Gretchen talked about cloud formations, and about her friend at school named Beverly, who had a dog named approximately nothing because her family couldn't agree on a name, and about what she thought the horses dreamed about. And then, not as a question, but as a simple statement of fact, she said, "I hope you don't leave." Marin stopped walking. Gretchen had stopped a few steps ahead, and was looking back at her with that same patient, measuring look that she had gotten from her father. "My dad is better since you came," she said. "He laughs more. He doesn't know I notice, but I do. I notice most things." She paused. "I've observed 14 cloud formations now." Marin stood in the snow and felt something shift in her chest, like a door she'd been leaning against had moved. She thought about her truck. She thought about the diner in Williams Lake, and the cousin she hadn't seen in 3 years. She thought about her father's toolbox in the back seat, which she'd been carrying around like a piece of him she couldn't set down. She didn't say anything to Gretchen. She just held out her hand, and Gretchen took it, and they walked back through the snow toward the house. The parts came on a Tuesday. Marin knew before Rupert said anything. She had been watching for it. The call from the mechanic in town, the way the day had that particular quality of things completing themselves. She was in the kitchen when he came in, and he had the look of a man who was about to say something he wasn't sure how to say. "Parts are in," he said. "Okay," she said. He stood in the kitchen for a moment. He did not sit down, which was unusual. He was a man who always sat down. He didn't hover, didn't pace, didn't occupy doorways. He occupied chairs, direct and without fuss. But he was standing in the kitchen doorway with his hands loose at his sides and the look of a man choosing words carefully. "You don't have to go," he said. "If you didn't want to." It came out plain and quiet and without decoration, which was the only way he knew how to say things, and which meant it was entirely true. She looked at him across the kitchen. The light was the same afternoon light that had made everything look warmer than it was when she'd first pulled over on that gravel road, the truck steaming, $43 in her pocket. She'd been moving for 2 years, trying to outpace something that she now understood you could not outpace. You just had to find a place that was worth stopping for. "I know," she said. "I don't want to." He nodded, once. The way he nodded, she turned back to the cutting board and kept working, and he came in and sat down at the table, and Gretchen came in from somewhere trailing snow and talking about cloud formations. And the kitchen held all of it, the snow and the cold outside and the warmth inside, and the smell of something cooking, and the sound of a child's voice filling up all the corners. That winter was the longest and the least lonely she had spent in years. Rupert fixed her truck himself, taking his time with it, the way he took his time with everything on the property. He showed her which fence posts on the south quarter needed replacing before spring and let her help, not because she had offered, but because he just handed her the tools and moved over to make room. She learned that he had grown up on this land, that his father had built the barn that leaned south, and that he had always meant to straighten it and had never quite gotten around to it. She learned that he read in the evenings after Gretchen was in bed. History mostly, the kind of thick books that take all winter. She learned that he made good coffee and bad pancakes, and that he knew this about himself. She told him things, too. About her father, who had worked the oil fields at Fort McMurray for 30 years, and who had known every tool by feel in the dark. About her mother, who had left when Marin was 11, and whom she no longer thought about with pain, only with the particular distance of something you've understood and set aside. About the 2 years on the road, which she could talk about now, not as something shameful, just as a time she'd needed and had taken. He listened the way he did everything, fully present, without rushing her. One evening in January, she was washing dishes, and he was drying them, which had become a thing that happened without either of them deciding it, and she said something about her father that made her voice go unsteady in a way she hadn't expected. She kept her eyes on the water. She heard him put the dish down, and then his hand was on her shoulder, not reaching for anything, not trying to fix it, just there. Solid and still, like a fence post that knows what it's for. She did not move. She let herself be held by that one steady point in the way you sometimes let yourself be held by a place. A room, a chair, a spot by the water, when you are tired of being the only thing keeping yourself upright. After a moment he went back to drying the dishes. Neither of them said anything. But something had been named that they hadn't needed to put into words, and that was all it needed to be for now. Spring came the way it comes in the Cariboo. Slowly, then all at once. The snow went off the fields in stages, south-facing slopes first, then the flat pasture, then the stubborn drifts along the north fence that clung until April, like they couldn't believe they'd been asked to leave. The horses grew restless and loud. Gretchen observed her 15th, 16th, and 17th cloud formations in the space of 2 weeks and was nearly beside herself. Marin had stopped thinking about Williams Lake sometime in February. She was not sure when exactly. It had simply ceased to be a destination and had become instead a direction. She had once been pointed in before something better had stopped her. She called her cousin in March and told her she wasn't coming. Her cousin said that was fine, that the diner had hired someone else in November anyway, and that she should come visit sometime. Marin said she would. She thought she probably would. There was a morning in late April when she was in the barn before sunrise, same as she had started doing most mornings. Not because of any task in particular, but because the barn in the early light had a quality to it she had not found anywhere else. That particular stillness before the day starts demanding things. Rupert came in a few minutes after her and went to check on the horses without acknowledging her, the way you don't acknowledge someone you've gotten used to. And she understood that this was something, that being unremarkable to a person was its own kind of home. He came to stand beside her at the gate of Pepper's stall. "She ate this morning," he said. "I saw," Marin said. "Spring," he said. "Spring," she agreed. Outside the barn the light was coming up over the tree line and coming through the high window above the stall in a long pale line. The horse breathed. Somewhere above the barn roof, a bird was working out what it wanted to say. Rupert was quiet for a long time. And then he said, without looking at her, "I'm glad you stopped on that road." She felt the truth of it before she felt anything else about it. Not the warmth of it, not the weight, just the plain true fact of it landing in the right place. "So am I," she said. He nodded. She didn't look at him, and he didn't look at her. The horse moved in the stall. The light came through the window and fell across the ground between them, and lay there quietly, the way good things do when they don't need to prove themselves. Gretchen appeared in the barn doorway in her school clothes, with her braid half done, and a very specific cloud formation question, and the day began, the way days do, in the middle of everything, and the barn was warm, and the land outside was waking up, and Maren Kessler was exactly where she was supposed to be.